Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Collins with the Small Business Development Center at SUNY Canton. I want to start off with some quick background and introduction. Tonight's webinar is brought to you by the SUNY Canton Small Business Development Center, as I just mentioned, and also Adirondack North Country Association, or ANCA, as probably most of you know them. And we've been doing this webinar for a few years now. We've kind of collaborated on this, starting originally to help people prepare for the ANCA Buyer Days that are hosted every spring. This one is next one is coming up March 31st and April 1st in Saratoga Springs. So probably some of you who are registered for this webinar are part of that show, but even if you're not, I think we're still going to have some pretty good information that we can share with you. And so we did decide, after a while to not necessarily limit this webinar to just people that were registered for the Buyer Days shows because there is some very good, general information. I'm going to do some things that we'll talk about a little bit specific to wholesale shows, but a lot of the tips that we're going to be talking about will be equally helpful for, other types of shows, retail shows. So we're going to start out talking about how to get ready for the show, how to prepare. I'll offer a few booth design tips. We'll talk about how to present yourself while you're at the show, and then some things you can do to follow up after the show. So we're going to go right from, before to after and walk you through that whole process. So I really like this quote by Roger Maris: "You hit home runs not by chance, but by preparation." And I think that's a really important key for success in any show, whether it's a wholesale show or a retail show. I think, the time that you put into preparing and, having everything ready to go is really going to make the process much smoother for you, but also I think, will give you a little bit more ability to focus on the customers that you're talking to at the show if everything's kind of set in place ahead of time. And especially if this is a first time show for you, you really want to be thinking ahead about some of the things that you can do to be as prepared as you can for that day. Once you're, registered for a show, or if you're thinking about attending a show, here are some of the things that you'd really want to be thinking about and know before you get to that show, so you can be better prepared and be able to do your best presence there. You need to know what kind of show it is. And so in this case, when we're talking about the Buyer Day shows, for those of you that are participating in that, that's a wholesale show where buyers are coming to purchase inventory for their retail operations. So you're going to be looking at selling your product wholesale to them. We did webinar a few weeks ago, strategies for wholesale success. And if anyone wants that recording, I can email you the link. My email will be at the end of the presentation. And we talked a little bit in that webinar about how to be prepared for a wholesale show and the things that you'd need to do to be ready to deal with buyers. So that's the kind of show that the ANCA show is. But then also, if it's a retail show, you kind of need to know that, ahead of time as well. It's, kind of basic know your audience type of stuff. You also want to find out from the show organizers or other people who have been to the show how people usually purchase at the show. Do they typically place orders for their wholesale goods? Are they paying cash and carry? Are they expecting to walk out with some purchases that day? Lauren's always told me that this particular show is a mixture of both. So some buyers are coming prepared to place orders, others are coming and want cash and carry. So in this particular show, you'd want to be prepared for both of those scenarios. Another thing to be thinking about, and I think most of the time you're going to get this information from show organizers, but if it doesn't come up, it's always something you can ask. But you're going to want to know how much space you're going to have and what's provided by the show organizers. So, what's the size of your booth? How large of table are you going to be provided? What's included when you pay that booth fee? Typically, you get a table and some chairs, but sometimes there's tablecloths, and if those are provided, are they included, or are they sometimes they're an extra cost? What's the setup going to be? Is it going to be kind of an open show floor? Are there dividers or pipe and drape that would, separate the booths? Some really big shows have hard walls. Is there lighting provided? Will internet or electricity be available? All of those kinds of things you kind of want to know ahead of time, so that as you're planning how you're going to set your booth up, you know what you have to take advantage of. The other thing, and again, will probably be provided to you by show organizers, in most cases, but if not, it's a thing to ask. What time can you start setting up? How much time do you have to prepare your booth, and being able to plan around that? If you expect that you're going to need 4 or 5 hours to prepare your booth and you really only have two, you're really going to be in a hard place. So you want to make sure that you're aware of that. And then also knowing when you have to have the booth removed and knowing how long that process is going to take as well. So kind of just being prepared for whatever time frame the show has set. Just a few ideas about what to make sure that you bring to the wholesale show in terms of, product and saleability. It's a good idea to bring product samples, especially in a show where there's a lot of ordering going on. You really want people to be able to experience your product, to be able to see it, to be able to touch it, to be able to look at the colors, the materials. So if you're able to provide some sort of, sample, that's really helpful. Wholesale packets, which again, we talked in great detail about in the webinar that we did previously. So if you're interested in that, just email me and let me know. But you would want to have some product catalogs. You would want to have line sheets prepared ahead of time and copies printed to be able to provide those to people at the show. Order forms, any of the information that you're going to need to give someone as you're working out an order with them. And in a case where there's a cash and carry at the show, as in this one, you want to make sure you've got product inventory. You want to have the stuff in stock that you're able to sell and have it with you. And just kind of a note with that is to be thinking about your branding if you're bringing product inventory, and even the products that you're selling, and in on an order basis. You want to make sure that you've got some consistent branding. So you want to have, labels, tags, packaging. Make sure you've got a really good logo to developed, and that's included on all of your packaging. You really want to give a professional presence when people are coming as wholesale buyers to be able to see what you got to sell. And also, keeping in mind that once that product gets to these stores, if a wholesaler comes and, buys a case of a product from you, once it gets to their stores, you don't have the advantage of representing the brand yourself anymore. And so now you have to rely on your branding and your packaging and your color scheme and your logo and how things are presented when you're not there. So those are important things to be thinking about as you're preparing to get into wholesale in general. Some other things that are helpful to bring along, clipboards are really handy. If you're filling out order forms with customers, that makes it a little bit easier rather than leaning over a table, or if you've got a couple people working on orders at the same time, it allows for that. A really good idea to have at any show, but also, especially at a wholesale show, is a form where you can collect information for your email marketing list. Have a sign up sheet at your booth or ask people to collect cards, but collect information so that you're able to, one of the big advantages of a show like this is having the exposure to all of the people that are there, and they're looking to buy. So, obviously it's great to sell stuff, but the next step is to make sure that you're getting those contacts and you start to develop an email marketing list or a mailing list or some kind of database of people that you can market to. And so use the show for that, and bring the forms and all the other things that you would need to do that. Another, kind of handy group of things to have with you is just kind of miscellaneous little tools and supplies, all those little things that you don't necessarily think about needing that might be floating around a junk drawer at home, pins, hammer, screwdriver, scissors, pen, office supplies, stapler, paper clips, or things like that. Maybe sometimes cleaning supplies. I've been to a few shows where we've gotten there to set up and the tables are kind of filthy. So, you want to be prepared for that depending on the venue. And sometimes when you're, even moving around like your display materials, if you've got display cases or shelving, sometimes that stuff gets, dirty and dusty and tattered as you're moving things around. So it's good to have some cleaning supplies to be able to kind of freshen stuff up a little bit. And then the stuff that you'll have for your booth design, your tablecloths and drapes, display fixtures, your signage, all the stuff that's going to make your booth look nice. And a really handy tip is to have a packing list created. And this, I think, you kind of hone over time as you go to more shows. But I know some people that I work with have kind of like a bug out bag that they have for their shows, where they've got a bin or a bag that's got everything that they need in it, and they, kind of go through their packing list and make sure everything's there, add what they need, go after their show. And then when they come back from the show, they check and say, okay, well, I'm low on, invoices, or I'm low on catalogs, and, restock the bin, and it's ready to go for the next show. So sometimes that can be useful. It doesn't work for everybody. But having a list of what you typically need for a show is a good thing to do and get in practice of, so that you're not finding you forget the same things over and over again. Another thing to think about before the show, comes around is planning for some sales and marketing. And so, if you haven't already, you will be getting a list, for the ANCA show, of the buyers who are attending. And so, that's your chance to do a little bit of research and learn a little bit about them, know who your audience is going to be. So you can look at their websites, go to their stores if you have the ability to do that, depending on where they're located and the time frame. But finding out as much about them as you possibly can beforehand, so you get a idea of what the flavor of their stores are, what kinds of things you may have that would match their needs, and also so you can kind of know who your targets are. You may see, a few buyers who are attending who might not be a really great fit with your products, but then you would notice that there are some who might be really good targets, so you can kind of have your eye out for them. You can get that information, like I said, from the show organizers or other people who have attended the show. They may be able to say, hey, this particular buyer, this particular retail store always looks for these certain items, and it's something you carry, or just those conversations that you have with other people in the industry to find out whatever you can about the buyers that will be at the show. And after you've done the show, you know, after a few years repeatedly, you start to kind of know some of them as well, some of the ones that are coming every year. You might think about creating some sort of specials that you can promote at the show. It might, encourage orders. It might be a small discount, or it might be, you know, uh, a complimentary display package along with a certain purchase, or some things that you might be able to do to incentivize people to make purchases or to make orders while you're at the show. Another really good way to prepare for being at the show and that salesmanship part of it is to practice your elevator pitch. And if you don't know what an elevator pitch is, I can explain it to you really quickly. It's basically your description of your business and your unique selling points in a very short amount of time. So it's kind of a quick summary of your business. And so it's called an elevator pitch because you're supposed to imagine, if you walked into an elevator and someone else walked on with you and you were going up one floor, and that person said to you, what is your business? What do you sell, or what is your product? You have from one floor to the next to be able to describe that to them. And so that's not a lot of time, and you want to make sure that you're very clear and you get to the point, but that you also describe it in enough detail that they understand what you're doing. So that's something you can kind of practice, so that if someone walks up to your booth, a buyer comes along and says, oh, this looks really nice. What are these? Or, oh, I've never heard of your business before. What do you do? You're able to have that response ready for them. And you don't want it, too scripted. You don't want to sound like you're, just kind of spewing out something like a robot. But I think practicing that elevator pitch a few times before the show and developing it just as an idea in your head helps you to be more ready to answer those questions, when you're on the show floor. The other thing that's really important to think about is defining the features and benefits of your products. So there's a few ways that you can kind of market yourself before the show. And so this is going to be, very focused marketing. You can do, some very general things like, hey, we're going to be at this show and on this certain date. But in the case of a wholesale show, buyers have already planned to be there, so they already know they're coming. So you're able to be a little more targeted, and you'll have their contact information ahead of time. You're able to, email them and say, hey, we're going to be at the show at booth number whatever. If you know your booth number, this is what we'll have to offer. Look at our website, come visit our store if you like, whatever, wordage you want to put in there to be able to get people interested in what you're selling. If you do decide to do any specials at the show, you could highlight those in your marketing. Again, you can do some advertising, before the show, maybe online or through social media. Again, very targeted and making sure that you're reaching the right people in the case of a wholesale show. But if you're doing a general show, or a retail show, those things can be a little more broad, and you can just put out a general, ad that says, hey, we're going to be at this expo or this show on this date, come and see us. And maybe you've got a free handout or a discount or some sort of incentive that you can offer to people. One thing I think that's really important for all businesses is to be able to, know your products really well. And sometimes I say that to people and they look at me like I'm a little crazy. They're like, I sell this. This is what I do every day. Of course I know my products. But the way you know your products isn't always the way your customers know that your product. You almost kind of have to teach them about your product. And so what you're wanting to do is be prepared to talk to people about your product in a way that's going to relate to them. And so we talked about the elevator speech. That's one way to kind of orient people to what it is that you do and what your products are. Another way to do that is through a USP, and USP stands for unique selling proposition. It's kind of a fancy way to say competitive advantage. It's just knowing what it is about your particular product that makes it unique or special or different. What is the reason that people would choose that product or your company over all the other choices that they have? And so you have to really think about what that, one or two things are. It doesn't always have to be something that's directly related to the product. So it doesn't always have to be, my product is made of this material or that material. It's more thinking about how your product makes your customers feel or how it improves their life in some way. I always say that people buy emotion more than they do fact. And so thinking about what is it about this product that gives people a certain feeling of security or a feeling of homecoming or, some sort of, warm fuzzy. So for instance, one of the vendors that's done this show a lot sells insect repellent. And so, you can talk a lot about, the types of ingredients that are in the repellent and what kind of bugs it keeps away and all of those factual things. But what really becomes the USP, I think, is the fact that the repellent is made of all natural products. There's no chemicals. So it's good for your health. So it's a safety issue. What makes people feel comfortable is that this is something you can apply to your skin without worrying about, harsh chemicals or things that might, harm your health. We've worked with somebody that kind of makes custom made stuffed animals and dolls. And those are all different. They're all different shapes and sizes, different materials. So the USP isn't really in the actual product. In the toy, the USP is that they're creating a family keepsake. The idea is that they want this particular doll or stuffed animal to be something that gets handed down from generation to generation. It's high quality. It's going to last for a lot of years, and that's what becomes the USP. And so that's what a customer is buying, is that knowledge that I can buy this for my child and they may give it to their child and beyond. And so another way to kind of know your product or to show customers, to show the people at the wholesale show that you know your product, is by thinking about the features and benefits of your product. And so features are the physical descriptive parts of your product. Like for instance, if somebody makes, like, let's say natural body lotions, the features are going to be, specific ingredients. Maybe it's shea butter, maybe it's beeswax, maybe it's a certain essential oil. Those are the features. And that's important information for consumers to know. But what really helps them connect to your product and decide to make a buying decision is the benefits. And so again, with that, and maybe a natural skincare product that has all natural ingredients, the benefit is, protecting your health, no harmful chemicals, being a safer product. We worked with somebody that made small leather products, and the features of those types of things, like, small pouches and belts and bags, the features you could describe for each one would be maybe like the type of leather that they're using, or, how it's treated, or maybe the color of it. But what the benefits are for any of those products is things like, longevity, that leather's durable, it's long lasting. Again, could become a family heirloom, has that long lifespan and Like leather's kind of known for getting, softer and nicer with age. So those kinds of things. And so you want to be able to make sure that your customers know about your features, but that what you really talk to them about a lot is the benefits. And in a case of a wholesale show, that's what you're really relying on those buyers to convey for you when they get your product in front of a customer. You always have to remember that as a wholesaler, you lose a little bit of control of how that product is presented to the end customer. If you're selling your product, in a store or at a retail show yourself, you see the customer, you talk to them, you're able to present your product in your own way. When you wholesale your products, you're selling your product to someone who owns a retail store who's going to be selling that to their customers, and you're not always there. You can't always see how they're presenting your product or how they talk about it. So you really want to make sure that they're well educated so that if a customer comes into their store and has a question, they're able to answer it and they're able to say, yes, these are the ingredients that are used in this product, or this is the type of leather that this bag is made out of. And so you want to be prepared to kind of have that ready for people to know. We're going to talk a little bit about booth design. And I saw somebody just sent a question in. Brooke is asking, what's the name of the specific tape we need to use on the floor? And that would probably be a question for Lauren, if you want to chime in on that one, Lauren.
Oh, yes. That's
And
called gaffer's tape.
okay. uh,
It's like a cloth tape they use in theaters and things.
Okay. And they're also asking for the spelling of it. Do you know how to spell it?
Yep. Gaffers.
I'm going to start talking a little bit about, booth design specifically and kind of the merchandising part of the, visual part of your booth. If you've done some retail shows in the past, there's going to be a lot of similarities and you're going to have some experience with this and feel a little more comfortable with it. If you've not and this is your first show, these things might be helpful also. One thing to think about is the 2-foot rule, which means that you just want to keep the most interesting items, the things that have the most visual appeal, within 2 feet of the show aisle. And so that doesn't mean that you can't have product in the back of your booth, but I think it's good to have the things that are most attractive or the most attention getting up toward the front. If it's possible to not have a lot of stuff in the back of the booth where people can't see it as well, you can attempt to do that, but I know sometimes it's not always possible depending on, what your product is or how much room you have. But the idea is that when people are walking by, they really notice the first 2 feet that's in front of them as they're looking at the booth and not the back wall or the back side of the booth. So the stuff that you think is going to be the most popular or that is the most eye-catching really should be right there at the front. And it's also important to remember to keep items displayed at eye level. I've seen some shows where people have things like kind of on the floor in front of their booth. That's really difficult because people can't see them. And if they do see them and they want to stop and look, they're kind of having to crouch down and they're kind of, blocking the flow of passersby. So it doesn't really work out well. So kind of having things as close to eye level as you can. Obviously, you can't have everything on a straight plane, but having things up where people can see them is the general idea. And so this is a picture of an example. And again, every show is going to be a little bit different. And, what you have in terms of booth space and how it's laid out is going to be different. This is, probably a relatively big show because you see here they've got hard walls, which is kind of a nice feature. But if you look at the table that's got some of the merchandise on it, the smaller pieces, those are right out toward the front. And you can see that they're kind of displayed toward the back as well. But the things that are right up front are the things that are going to catch people's eye and then they can walk by there and it looks like jewelry to me. So they'll walk by and go, oh, that bracelet's really pretty. And they'll stop and look at those things and then start to take a minute to look around and see the things in the back. So those are the things that kind of draw people in right there in the front. This is another one where you can see there's a lot of stuff in this booth. There's a lot of things to look at, but they do have some things. You can see those tall stands that are placed right out near the front so that people are walking by. They're going to be able to see those pretty quickly. They can see that material hanging there and what it looks like. And then they can walk to the back if they want to see detail and some other things. So it's just the idea that something eye-catching toward the front that will help to draw people in. Branding is important in general, but I think it's particularly important when you're in any show setting and especially in a wholesale show. And again, because you're counting on that retailer after they purchase your product and put it in their store to be representing your brand. So you want to make sure that you're giving them a really good idea of what that brand is at the show when they're making the purchase. And we could do a whole webinar on branding alone, but the idea is that you want to try to keep your booth really kind of in sync with your overall brand, and you should really have a consistent color scheme, a really well developed logo, and kind of an overall atmosphere that you've developed. If you've got a shop, or if you've got done other retail shows or things like that, people should kind of get an idea from your booth what your company is all about. And that can be done by, props and visual stuff along with that other just regular branding stuff like your logo and your colors, in your signage. And even the way you dress can kind of reflect your brand as well. So, if you sell athletic wear and you come, in a formal gown, that probably doesn't really mesh with your brand. You want to make sure that you're kind of keeping that consistent. So I've got a few pictures here with some different, booths that I think do a pretty good job of representing the brand. This one here has no product in it. You can see that. But I think you could probably venture a guess of some of the things that could easily be the product for this company. It could be, maybe cheese. It could be rustic crafts. There's all kinds of different things that could be represented there. It might be denim clothing, it could be leather goods. So something that's maybe rustic or has a little bit of a country feel to it, maybe related to farming or agriculture or something like that. So you can see that brand just from this booth without even knowing what the company sells. Here's another example to kind of give you an idea about how branding impacts your booth or how it can be used in your booth. So if you look at this, we've got two booths here that both sell jewelry, but you can tell quickly by looking at them that they're both very different in their brand. They're very different in their presentation of what they sell. And so the one on the left is a little bit more vintage, antique looking, different type of jewelry, different type of atmosphere. The one on the right is, a little bit more modern, a little more sleek, a lot of silver and shiny metal. So you can see their booth is very clean and uncluttered to kind of reflect that. And so, even if you took all of the jewelry out of both of these booths, you'd still be able to get a pretty good idea of what their brand was. And that's the idea that we're looking for here as you're building your booth. And again, these are examples where you've got hard walls and, maybe some things that you won't necessarily be able to take advantage of at this particular show or at a lot of shows, but the idea is the same, that you are trying to kind of present a brand or a specific atmosphere with the way you set your booth up and the materials that you use in your booth. Another really good way to create interest in your products is to find a way to demonstrate them. And a lot of people say, well, I have this and such my own. Maybe I make scarves. How do you demonstrate that? So, it's not always just what you traditionally think about as demonstrating. There's a lot of different ways of demonstrating what you do to your customers. Anytime you can use your product or show your product in use, or even use photos or a short video that's set to run on a loop that shows your product in use, that can be helpful. If it's a some sort of clothing item or something like that, you can maybe provide samples or color swatches, color charts, information like that. One thing I think that works really well at a wholesale show is if you're able to show the buyers what their product would look like in their store. So show, how it may be displayed in a retail setting, or how the packaging would look on a retail shelf, something that can help them to visualize that product in their store. If you're a maker, if you make anything from scratch, any type of craft or product, it's always a really good idea to be able to show how the product is produced. And again, you can do that maybe with a series of photos or a video, or if there's a way that you can do, part of the process while you're there at the show, sometimes that's helpful as well, because people are really interested in, the backstory and the process of those goods. Yeah, I worked with a woodworker once who did all kinds of like unique wood furniture and toy chests, and he did these wooden rocking horses was one of the product lines that he had. That's all stuff that's hard to demonstrate. You can come and look at it, you can open the chest up, you can sit in the chair and see if it's comfortable. You could maybe have a video or some photos of a product in process so people could see, the tools that were used. But what he did was take one of his rocking horses, and one of his selling points was that his product were, heirloom quality, very good quality that they would last for generations. So he had this rocking horse, child-sized rocking horse, and he was a grown man. And throughout the show, if when he had downtime, he would sit on the rocking horse and kind of rock back and forth. And so that kind of attracted a little bit of attention. People were wondering, like, what's going on here? And so they would come up and they would start talking about the rocking horse, and he'd be able to tell them, this is really made for a child, but obviously an adult can use it. I've brought this around to many shows and we've been using it and it's still in good shape. And so it's just a way to kind of generate some interest and get people talking about what was going on in the booth. So think about things that you can do to demonstrate that might fall into that realm. This is a picture that, again, obviously a lot of you are not going to be able to do something like this at the wholesale show, but this is for DeWalt Tools, where they have a booth set up where people can actually come and use the tools and experience them at a trade show. Again, the idea that people, need a way to kind of experience what you have to offer. This is a booth with, a gentleman that makes, these instruments, handmade instruments. If that's what you're doing, what better way to demonstrate than to be playing the instrument in your booth, letting people hear how it sounds, letting them, see what it looks like, and see the end result of your work. So something like that might be feasible. If you have a food product, you're prime for demonstration, and in your case, demonstration is samples. If you're selling cheese, you have some samples. If you make smoked meat or jerky or anything like that, if you're able to give samples to people, then they're able to experience that product before they make the purchase. This particular booth, again, it's an example of, like textiles, clothing types of items that are a little harder to demonstrate. But if you look at this on that, that far wall, and you can see those scarves that are kind of aligned there, that's how they might look in a retail setting. If I have a store and I'm thinking, well, how am I going to display these? There's your answer. They look at, oh, wow, all I really need is a rack where I can put these scarves up and maybe put them in, kind of a rainbow color order. So it's a good way for people to be able to see how that would look in their store, and make them a little more likely to make a purchase. Another thing to think about in having an effective booth at the wholesale show, or really at any type of show, even a retail show as well, is having good communication. And that's not just, your verbal communication, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too, but the visual communication in your booth, and what people see and the information that's available to them. So signage is a really big part of that. Customers really need to know who they're buying from and what they're buying. And so you want to make sure that they can clearly see your company name. It'd be a good idea to have a name tag so that they can see who you are or remember your name. A lot of people will just, simply have a banner that they hang in the back of their booth. If you have something more elaborate than that, that's fine too. Lots of times people have a tablecloth or a table drape that has their logo and their brand on the front, which works okay, but also remember that if it's a really crowded, busy show, that people may not be seeing that. So you may need some signage, maybe behind you as well for people to see. You need really good communication, like in your pricing, either with tags or packaging that you have on your products, or having a really clear price list. If you've got items that are laid out on the table, they need to be able to see, the blue ones are this much, the red ones are this much, even if it's just a sign there that they can see, but make sure that it's clear and it's accurate. The other thing I think that's really important to remember, and again, especially at a wholesale show, is having some sort of documentation of your materials or your ingredients or what's included in the package. Make that an incorporated part of your packaging. And again, it's that difference of, when you're at a retail show and somebody walks up and says, oh, I want to buy your product, what's in it, you can tell them. When you sell to a wholesaler, they're taking that back to their shop, and a customer might come in and say, oh, this looks really nice, what are the ingredients in it, or what is it made of? If the shop owner doesn't know that, and if you haven't told them, then that information doesn't get to the customer, and that, make it a little more difficult for them to make the purchase. So making sure that that's printed somewhere on your packaging, is just a good practice overall. And so here's a good example of some good signage. You can see here each thing isn't tagged individually. That's not always necessary, especially with cash and carry. something like this works really well. Just a sign that says, these journals are $35, the iPad sleeves are 40, and they're laid out right in front of the sign. So it's no mistaking what product goes with which sign. Again, some really good signage, these particular earrings, this is how much they are. They're grouped together, so it's really easy to figure out how much each item is worth. The necklaces are in the middle, and that's where the sign is. So, just kind of some really plain, easy to read signage. Another really nice strategy that I like in shows in general, and I think particularly in wholesale shows, it can become a handy item, is to have a consultation or a buying area. Keeping in mind that it's not always possible in some show setups, it's a little difficult to do. And for some businesses, it might be difficult to do. So you really have to evaluate if it's something that's going to work for you or not. But if you're able to create a space in your booth where you can sit and meet with buyers, it really helps that process. It gives you a chance to talk to them sort of in private, a little bit, away from the hustle and bustle of the show, all the traffic passing by your booth. It may just be a couple of chairs in the corner of your booth off somewhere, depending on, again, how big the booth is or what kind of space you have. Thinking about maybe creating a space where people can actually enter into your booth, setting it up so that they can kind of walk in if you're able to have those kinds of conversations. If you don't have enough room for that, or if your product doesn't allow for it, you can even, find a place at the venue. And sometimes, like there might be a little snack bar or coffee shop, or even just a little waiting area or a lobby where you can go and sit down just away from the noise of the show to talk to someone. That's really only going to work if you've got someone helping you staff the booth, that you can say to this person, I'm going to go off with Joan and talk about my products, and we'll fill out an order form, and I'll be back in a few minutes. So if you're not free to leave your booth, then that won't be an option. But thinking about how can you, find a way to make that time with the buyers that are there and help them get their order together, with everything else that's going on. So that's just kind of the point of it. And I have a couple examples. This is actually not a great example of a booth in general because it's very crowded and hectic, and I feel like I'm going to trip over the wires that are on the ground, and there's not a lot of room to walk around this table. But the idea is that there's a consultation area here, so I just wanted you to see that. I think if the booth was, a little bigger and had more room, that this might be a good idea. But you can see here it's a place where you can sit down. You maybe can pull up your website if there's internet access to be able to show people what you have to offer, maybe some things that you don't happen to have with you, but just gives you a chance to have that conversation with somebody. This one's a little bit more, practical in terms of setup, but again, this is, probably a pretty large show with some pretty big booth space. But you can see that there's this kind of desk area in the front where people can sit down and chat and talk, and there's a nice display there. So just something to keep in mind that it might be possible for you to do in your show, or at some other shows in the future. So another way to kind of enhance the way your booth looks or to highlight some of the things in your booth is to use lighting. And again, you have to take the venue into consideration. This isn't always going to work. It depends on, what kind of lighting is in the venue already and what's offered in your booth. But you can find out ahead of time what's provided. If there's going to be a certain type of lighting in each booth, or if you're going to have electricity even. But it doesn't have to be, real fancy. It can be something as simple as some desk lamps or floor lamps, track lighting if you've got, some infrastructure there that you can hang it from. Think about uplighting, placing lights on the floor and directed up in the back of your booth. And I've even done some, pretty interesting things with just some strategically placed flashlights, and kind of hiding them with some table drape or something like that. So, if there's some things that you want to highlight on your booth, think about maybe, doing that. And these are some things you can kind of practice at home or in your shop beforehand, laying things out and playing with the lighting and seeing how they look. And of course, when you get to the venue, the type of lighting there is going to make it look a little bit different, but there's some things that you can kind of play with ahead of time. This is particularly important, I think, if you have a product that's got a lot of detail, a lot of fine detail that you really want people to be able to see well. But it's also a good idea if you've got product, that's kind of reflective or shiny. The light kind of just makes it look a little bit more exciting. And so again, here's an example. This is, somebody that's selling, some gemstones, and this lighting is just, a clamp on desk lamp that's got a really good, a nice neck where you can focus the light. It's pointing right at the product, and you can see that it makes it much easier to see what the product is if somebody's coming to this booth to purchase. So just something simple like that. This is an example of uplighting when it's kind of more toward the back of the booth, but you can see that there's some lighting there that's shining up. It just kind of gives the back a nice glow. If you've got particular products that you want to highlight, you would be able to hang them back there if you have that type of booth. This is another example of using lighting to really kind of highlight some things. And so obviously this booth sells jewelry, and you can see that there's, the jewelry laid out in the front part of the booth that people can walk up and see. But then those pictures in the back are close-ups of some detail work, which is a nice way to feature, jewelry pieces, I think. And then they've highlighted those even more with some lighting. So you can see some of those necklaces in the back. Even if you're standing, toward the front of the booth, you can see a lot of the detail there. So it's a nice way to highlight that. Again, these are just some clip-on lamps. The ones up at the top are just clipped on the pipe and drape and pointed down, and then the ones toward the back are just kind of some tall stand-up lamps. So it doesn't have to be anything, really complicated. We'll talk a little bit about like just general merchandising, setting up, your booth and making sure that things are visible. But merchandising is really what allows the buyer to be able to envision your product as part of their retail operation. So it's a good idea to use kind of varying heights to create some interest. If you have standard flat shelves that go across the top of your table, people just kind of scan by and they don't really take as much time to look. But if they're moving their head, if they're looking at one level and then moving their head up and looking at another level, it takes them a little more time and they're there to absorb what they're seeing a little bit more. Always remember that 2-foot rule, but if you've got some products that you really want to feature, your big sellers or the things that you want to be your big sellers, those should really be at eye level. Those should be kind of front and center right where they can be seen easily. The other thing you want to think about when you're setting up your display and your merchandising is how your customers are going to interact with the product. So, is this a product that people are going to want to touch? Are they going to want to pick it up? Are they going to want to look at it? So, like for instance, if you're selling candles, people are going to want to pick those up and smell them, right? They want to know, what does this smell like? What does this scent like? If you have them kind of stacked in a pyramid on your table, it's going to make it very hard for them to do that. You want to make sure clothing items are another one that's a little tricky. I see lots of times people will stack clothing items, fold them and stack them up, and you can't really see what it is. But also, if I want to take a look at a particular size or I want to touch the material, I've kind of got to pull the pile apart, and it just makes a mess. So you really want to make sure that you're making things accessible to the buyers, that they're able to see and touch and feel to whatever extent they need to. Thinking about the product lines that you're developing is important before you go to the show. And so you may have, a handful of different product lines. If you do, you want to try to group similar items together. So, if you sell maybe some food products, I guess a good example would be like dip mixes. So if you've got some dip mixes, maybe one side of the table you're going to have the ones that are spicy, and then in another area you're going to have the ones that maybe go really well with chips, and then maybe you're going to have some that are a little more sweeter and they're going to be grouped somewhere else, so that people can kind of easily get an overview of what you have to offer and evaluate the ones that they want. And so if they have to skip all around back and forth to find the things that they're looking for, it makes it harder. Also, be careful of not having a display in the front of your booth that's too tall that it kind of hides everything behind it or hides you. You want to be able to have that eye contact with the shoppers, to be able to talk to them, to be able to get their attention when they're walking by. So try not to have things stacked up too high or to have display pieces that are really tall that are going to kind of conflict with that. So here's an example, and I like this one because what you can see is that it's got things at different levels. So there's some things on the table, there's some things a little above the table, some things up higher. They're kind of spread out and displayed so you can see the designs like on the tea towels. You can see all of the colors and the designs. The t-shirts are hung so that you can read what the messages say. So you're not leaving a lot of question to the buyers. They're able to see right away what they're getting. And then you'll notice with the t-shirts, I really like this, how they've got them displayed along the top so you can see them. And then underneath each one, there's a pile which probably has, the different sizes. So someone can say, oh, I really want to get that purple one and I need a small, a medium, and a large for my shop. You can go right over to that pile, find the small, medium, and large. Your display is still intact and they're able to get what they need pretty easily. So thinking about, how those customers are going to buy from you and what questions they're going to be asking. This is another one that has a lot of things at different eye levels that I like. And you can see here that as you look throughout the display, there are some items that are repeated, like that little rabbit vase. That's in 2 or 3 different spots, but it's grouped with other items. So it shows different uses for it. So I think that's a good display tip as well as, this is really something that as a shop owner, a person could look at this and say, oh, this is how I could display this in my store. This would work really well on my shelf. So it kind of shows them how this would look in their store, shows them how to group the items together. They see the full collection and how it fits together. So you've got, these little containers that have pictures of the animals and then some of the containers that are the animals. And so it all kind of blends together. This one might be, something to think about the height of it depending on how your booth is set up. If you're, as a seller standing behind those racks, you might be hidden, but you could have something like this maybe toward the back of your booth or something that just wasn't stacked as high. This is another example of, what I think is some pretty good merchandising. And so, if you look at this booth, up in the front, they've got these handbags for sale. And you can see it's not really great in the picture, but toward the bottom of the picture, you can see that they're kind of hanging. There's a hook there and they hang along the front. So someone can see the bag. They can see the size of it when it's hanging on the hook, how big it is. They could pick it up, they could look at it. And then on top of the table, they're packaged. So each of those packages is one of those cloth bags folded up and sealed in a package. So now they can see not only how does that look on display, but how is it going to fit on my shelving in my store? And all of those design colors are visible. So they can easily say, oh, I want this bag and I want this color, and this color. They don't have to open them all up because they know what the product is. When they get it back to their shop, they'll be able to merchandise it. Same thing with those aprons in the back. There's a sample that's up there, so someone could come up and touch it. They can feel the fabric, get an idea of how it's made, look at the stitching. And then below it on the rack, you can see the corresponding design and all the different fabric patterns. So they're able to look at that and pick out the colors that they want. So they can still see the product, but they're able to kind of differentiate between the color schemes that they want without having to display them all fully. I like this one because it's like a printing shop or a stationary store, and you can see that this is a really good way to display items that aren't huge. If you've got a lot of small items, sometimes if you've got a flat space where you can hang them and make them easily accessible, and especially if it's something printed, there's good lighting here. People can walk right up to them and see what's printed on the cards or what's printed on the stationery. And it just kind of gives a really simple way to kind of display and for people to choose easily. You could see if those were kind of stacked on a table, they kind of get shuffled around and they might get, one gets lost under another one or the pile gets knocked over. This is a really nice way somebody can come up and just say, hey, I want this one, and this one. You fill out your order form and they go on their merry way. And that's really, I think, part of the goal of the wholesale show is to be able to make those sales with the retailers and the buyers that are coming through as easily as possible because they're there to buy and they don't want to have to spend an overly large amount of time in any one booth. They want to be able to make decisions and kind of move on to some extent. So just a few final tips in terms of having your booth ready and putting your booth design together. One thing to think about is having a place for your personal stuff in your booth, like you're going to maybe have a coat and a tote bag or a purse or maybe a change of shoes or, some things like that. Just have a neat place for them to be. It might be, in a tote bin, maybe shoved underneath a table covered by a tablecloth or, you may have some extra marketing materials or extra catalogs or extra order forms. It's just a good idea to have a place for all this stuff so that it's not just kind of laying around in piles in the back of the booth. You want to try to keep your booth looking really neat. If you look at a lot of those pictures, you can see that all you really saw there was the product. You didn't see, like the owner's coat draped over the back of their chair, or a pile of catalogs in the corner. So you want to try to find a way to control the stuff. I also think it's really helpful to have a booth layout plan, to think about how you're going to set this booth up before you get to the show. And so I always tell people to practice, have a table or a surface area that's similar to what you're going to have at the show, and play with it. Get your product out, use all of your display pieces, your shelving units, or whatever it is that you have, all of your props, all of your table drapes, and get them out and play with it. Find a way that you really like, something that you think is functional. Play with where things are placed, how high you stack things, and then when you find some things that work or some things that you really like, take pictures so you remember it when you get to the show and you can redo it. Maybe do a little blueprint, or some kind of design that you can remember when you get to the show. But doing that stuff ahead of time, and obviously you can tweak it when you get to the show depending on circumstances that are there. But I think if you go in with a pretty good plan and you know how you're going to set it up ahead of time, it makes that setup go much more quickly. Keep in mind, if you're relatively new to doing shows, try to do what you can to keep your materials portable and lightweight. So whenever you're making a purchase for things that are going to go on your table, maybe it's display shelving or things like that, thinking about, really lightweight materials, maybe shelving or display cases that can come apart and be easily packed. It makes it a lot easier when you're coming in and out of a show. And the other thing that you can plan ahead too is knowing how much setup time you have. So when you're doing this practice at home, you can say, okay, I'm going to, maybe do this from beginning to end and see how long it takes. If it takes longer than the amount of time I have, then, I maybe need to change some things. The other thing I think that it's really important to plan ahead is your attire, and thinking about, again, always with that branding in mind. Am I representing my brand? It may be, having a kind of a quote unquote uniform that you use at the shows, a particular way you dress, or it may even be, apparel that you've got your company name embroidered on or something like that. But the idea is, being neat, being and comfortable at the same time, and still looking professional. Comfortable shoes for sure, because you're probably going to do a lot of standing, you're going to do a lot of talking. So you want to make sure that you're comfortable throughout the day, but still kind of presenting your brand and being neat. Once you're at the show, there's some things you're going to want to be thinking about in kind of being able to put your best foot forward and have the most success. Like I just mentioned, you're going to be on your feet all day. Plan to be standing. So have comfortable shoes, or, maybe during the day you change shoes to kind of help out, but you really want to be prepared to talk with people, to greet them. So you want to be face to face, you want to be standing up as much as you can. If you have to sit, if you've got, like a back problem or a knee problem or something that doesn't allow you to stand all day, if you can get a tall stool or a tall, like a director's chair type of thing to sit in, that still gives you good eye contact with people. They still feel that you're present there. You're not kind of hunched in the back in a lawn chair. Another thing that's kind of important, but also difficult to do, is to staff your booth as much as possible. And so, if you don't have the luxury of having someone else with you, obviously you're going to need bathroom breaks. You're going to need to, just take a break, or you need to go to the restroom or have a snack or eat a meal. So, if you don't have the ability to have someone else with you, it's okay to ask one of the neighboring booths to say, look, I've got to step away for a few minutes. If anyone comes by, can you just tell them I'll be right back? Or, something like that. People typically understand that. If you are able to have a friend or a relative or an employee that can come with you, that's even better. It helps to break up the workload a little bit. It kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off. Kind of be thinking about that as a possibility of maybe there's somebody that would like to come with you, a friend or a relative that would like a little bit of a trip or something like that. The most important thing is to be approachable, though. I think at any show, it gets, those are pretty long days and they're a little exhausting, and you want to try to have as friendly and open a demeanor as you can with the people that are coming by to see your booth. So trying to be approachable, try not to be using your phone or be on a tablet. Don't, be sitting in the back of the booth, hunched over in a chair, reading a book. That doesn't really tell people that you want to talk a lot about what you're doing. If it's possible, not having any food or drink on the display table, right there. For one thing, if you're a slob like me, you're pretty likely to spill something and make a mess. But also, I think it detracts from, your display, your products. So try to keep those things behind the table. If it's possible, if you have some relief with you, so a friend or an employee or a business partner, you can take shifts eating and get away from the booth. Do whatever you can to make that effort. Always greet people, even if it's someone who's not necessarily going to stop at your booth. Just a simple hello and a smile. Staying positive. The smile is a big one, and sometimes we forget that in a show setting because you kind of get into the groove of people walking by, people walking by, people walking by, and it just gets a little redundant after a while. So you have to kind of make that conscious effort to remember that. So again, smile. It's an important thing, and I think some of us don't think about how much or how little we smile. You've all heard the resting, what face. Some of us have that problem. So, try to keep that in mind. And then when you're talking to people, again, just greeting them, if they're not really, talking a lot about your product or they don't have a lot of questions, question them, get a conversation going, use some open-ended questions, ask them things like, what brings you to the show today? What type of products are you looking for? Ask them to tell you about their store or their customers. What are your customers like? What types of things do they buy? Is your store open all year round? How long have you owned your business? Just kind of getting that conversation going, and you may find that you have some kind of connection where what you're selling and your brand fits in with what they're doing that they may not have seen right away. Simple things like just commenting on something they're wearing or something they've bought. If they're walking by and they're carrying something that's intriguing, talking to them about that. So using whatever tools you can to kind of strike up a conversation. Body language is really important, I think, too. We talked about, standing and kind of being eye level, making eye contact, not slouching in the back of the booth in a lawn chair. But other things like, when people are talking, you've got that table in between you, kind of a little bit of a barrier. So try to lean forward a little bit. And sometimes, if you're like me, sometimes you have to lean forward a little bit to be able to hear. Try to not do things like cross your arms or lean on the display. I know that's a big problem for me. It's a comfortable way to stand, and you don't always know what to do with your arms. But those are things that kind of tell people that you're closed off and you're not interested. So you wanna try to avoid those things. And remember, if you look bored, customers are not going to be really excited about what you have to sell. And we do have a question, comment here, and I'll stop before I go on to the last little piece of the webinar. Just, asking to talk about the arrival and setup and departure with the booth, the possibility of shipping your booth and supplies. I don't think, and Lauren, you can jump in here. I don't think you have a mechanism for people to ship their booth materials ahead of time for the ANCA show. Is that correct?
That's correct. The city center doesn't have the ability to hold materials. I mean, if you can make sure that they're going to arrive the day that we move in, then they do allow it. But I know it's really hard with mailing to cut it that close. So we
Right.
generally do not do that.
And I think typically, if you're looking into a show or if you've registered for a show or signed up, the show organizers will provide you that information if you're able to ship your stuff ahead of time, and if so, how to do that, if there's any fees, if they have a certain time frame when that can be done. And I do know that Lauren, for this show and as other shows will let when you're able to access the venue, where to drop off, where to unload and load and those type of things. And so those are the kinds of things I think that you need to be thinking about as you're preparing for the show. And it kind of ties back to some of that other stuff of, if it's a show that you can't ship stuff ahead of time and you're going to have to carry it all in, then you want to make sure it's stuff that you're going to be able to carry without exhausting yourself. If you have a certain drop off point, you want to make sure that you can get your stuff loaded out of your vehicle and into the venue, and being able to work with that time frame too. Something that I think is pretty important at any show, but I think it's really helpful in a wholesale show, is to be able to collect data. Because obviously, selling is the number one goal here, but the secondary goal really should be collecting information. This is a really good opportunity for you to make connections with buyers who, even if they're not purchasing something today, could potentially be customers in the future, or may recognize that your product fits with someone else's store or someone else that they know. So those connections are really important part of any kind of event like this. And so, like I said before, you want to have some sort of mechanism where customers can sign up for, a newsletter or your email list, and you use that then to promote other shows that you're going to be at or future sales. When you launch a new product, you can let them know. As you're talking to people throughout the day, it's a good idea to kind of make some notes, either in a notebook, or if you're exchanging cards with someone, take a minute to kind of jot a note on the back of their business card of maybe any special requests that they have or special needs, things that you talked about, so that when you do follow up with them, you've got that information. It's also a good idea to make notes on, things that are maybe requested that you don't have, or customer feedback, or, just general information like, I sold a lot of size small shirts today that I didn't really anticipate and I ran out, and having that kind of information going forward to help you, better your show performance every time. One thing also that you can do while you're at any show, really, a wholesale show or a retail show, is remind customers to look for you on social media. Make sure that your social media information is on your business cards when you provide them to them. And again, becomes part of branding. It should be on your packaging as well, so that they are always able to find you. But really use that as a way to boost your following on social media, just by making that mention and providing people the information, and that's another benefit that can come from doing these shows. When you're interacting with buyers, there's a few things to remember, or to kind of stick to. And again, everybody's a little bit different, and you're going to find some buyers who approach things one way and some that approach things a different way. But in general, I think you want to make sure that you're really clear and to the point. And again, that's where things like your elevator pitch, your USP, knowing your features and benefits, those really come in handy, so that when someone has a question, you're able to answer it. You don't have to think a lot about, what it is that they're asking and how to answer it. Know your pricing, know what things cost, know what you're charging, know your payment terms. Are you going to extend credit or not? What's your turnaround time? Those are the kinds of questions that buyers are going to want to ask, and you want to be able to have those answers prepared for them. Also, you want to make sure that you're making it easy for buyers to work with you. So you want to make sure that you have your information ready to go, that you've got, again, a clipboard that's got maybe an ordering packet on it with your line sheet and an order form, and, maybe a business card or a brochure or something that they can take with them afterwards. But having that ready, so you don't have to say, oh, you want to place an order? Well, let me just dig in my box here and see if I can find an order form. Everything's ready to accommodate them. Keeping in mind that you want to try to make it easy for buyers to work with you. You have a system down, know what your policies are, have your information ready, and try not to place too many restrictions on their orders. And again, the webinar we did previously to this, we did talk about things like setting minimum orders, and your decision of, whether it's the right thing to do or how much you need to do. But thinking about that, and I think sometimes it can be a good tool, but you want to be careful that you're not limiting people too much. And again, always collecting leads for follow-up, whether someone's buying from you or not. And so kind of that interaction and networking has some really good value. So when you're at the show, you want to be ready for orders. So like I said, have those clipboards ready with your order forms, and if you've got the ones that have the duplicate, is really helpful. If you're doing the ordering online, having that ready to go, having test it, make sure the internet's working, make sure your website's working. Have plenty of pens handy if you're filling out order forms. Thinking about ship dates is really important if you're doing a lot of taking orders. So you really have to know what your production time is and how long it takes you to produce an item, and how long you'll be able to supply the customer. Try to spread your ship dates out depending on what the customer, the wholesalers, or the retailers needs are, so that you're not promising everybody a delivery in 6 weeks that you can't meet. It's a good idea to have a calendar with you if you know what your production time is. If I know I can make 100 candles in 2 weeks, the first 100 candles go into that first 2-week order, and then the next 100 candles, you tell people it'll be 4 weeks before I can deliver. Kind of keeping that in mind so that you don't get back from the show and be just slammed with orders that you're not able to fulfill, or that you'll kill yourself trying to fulfill them. For first time orders, require payment upfront or get their payment information at the show, and always process that payment method before you ship to them. I wouldn't recommend extending credit to people on a first time order. And if you can avoid extending credit to people in general, that's even better. But definitely on the first order, that's where you're establishing your relationship with that particular buyer, and you want to make sure that it's a good one. So make sure that you get that payment before that happens. And we did in the previous webinar talk a little bit about, making the decision about whether to extend credit and how long for and how to manage that. So, you've worked really hard, you learned your audience, you did all the research, you went to the show, you set up, you sold a whole bunch of stuff, and now you're exhausted. So you can take a day to rest after the show, but then you want to start thinking about some of the things that you want to do after the show, to kind of continue to capitalize on the contacts that you made there. When you're following up on leads, if you've talked to some people to show that had some interest, maybe they had interest in some things you didn't have right then, or, they had some interest, but they just weren't ready to buy. Think about starting to make those follow-ups, whether they're right away or maybe scheduling them in a few weeks or whatever the time frame might be. Again, keeping those notes as you're talking to people, maybe on the back of a business card or just jotting them down in a notebook, helps you to personalize that contact. So you can call a retailer and say, "Oh, hi Frank, we met at the Anka show, and I know you said that you were looking for, some items with a Christmas theme. We didn't have any of them, but I want you to know that we have some now." And that helps them, number one, to remember you, but then also it helps them to feel, a little bit more special. They're like, "Oh, this person remembered me. They're a really good salesperson, and so they maybe, would be more likely to purchase." You may want to do a little follow-up special, maybe offer some free shipping or a little discount or a free display fixture. You kind of have to be careful of that. If you didn't offer some sort of special at the show, might kind of upset a few people that made purchases at the show. So if you're going to do it, I would do it at the show and after. You want to add your new contacts to your mailing list, whether it's an email list or a snail mail list. Either way, you can use that list to invite people to other shows you're going to be at, let them know about, maybe seasonal products or new product launches. The thing to remember is always give people a way to opt out. If you're doing an email list, make sure there's an unsubscribe that they can let you, know they don't want to be part of that anymore. And then you want to follow up on orders. So, the first rule is you want to make sure that you honor the ship dates that you provided people. If something happens and you're not able to, you want to make sure that you make contact with the retailer and tell them that and explain why, and work something out. Don't just ship the stuff 6 months after you said you were going to, and hope for the best. But when you're shipping your orders, your items should all have an item number on them. And again, we addressed that in the previous webinar a little bit and talked about having item numbers on your line sheets and on your products. But make sure that everything that gets shipped has an item number, so that if someone has a problem with it and they call you, you can say, "What's the item number on that?" And you know exactly what they're talking about. An easy way to do that is include it on your packaging, and so that it's always there. You don't have to remember to do it. It's just a given. Include a packing list in the shipping box. So if you've got 12 candles and there are 4 different scents, listing those on the packing list, so that number one, when you're packaging it, you've got a way to double check that everything's in there. But then also when it gets received by the retailer, they're able to double check that what you've shipped is what's actually recorded. Another really good tip is to not put the invoice for the product in the packing box if you've agreed to extend credit. If you're sending an invoice, send it separately from the shipment in a separate envelope for a couple reasons. Sometimes that box will arrive at a store and it may be an employee that unpacks it and shelves it, and they don't notice that there's an invoice in there, or they just think it's a packing list, or it gets thrown away by mistake. So you want to make sure that that invoice is going to get into the right hands. So send it separately in an envelope that it can't get lost or confused with other things. And then it's always a good idea to do a little bit of show review. If you're a one man, one woman shop, you do that with yourself, but if you've got a team, sometimes you can talk it over, thinking about, what worked, what went well, what didn't go so well, what could we improve next time, what things would we change. It may be just general things, or it may be things specific to that venue that you would do differently. If you're doing a lot of shows, it's a good idea to keep a notebook or a journal so you can make notes of, what shows performed the best for you, what things were really good at the show, what things you didn't like, things, maybe, we packed too much stuff for this show and we had to carry it all out, or we had to go up a lot of stairs. So remember to pack light, or, just little tips that will help you next time around. Yeah. So somebody asked, do we take the credit card info at the show and only charge it before we ship? Yes, that's what I would recommend doing. I think, and Lauren, you can chime in on this too, but I think most buyers are going to be willing to do that. You want to make sure though that you don't, you're responsible for that information. So you want to have that in a secure location. Don't leave it at your booth and walk away. Don't leave it at your booth overnight. Keep it with you, keep it someplace secure so that it's not just kind of hanging around. If someone's not comfortable with leaving that information to you, then you can just contact them. When this is ready to ship, I'll contact you. We'll process the payment then and I'll ship it out. So you could do it either way, but I think, Lauren, you can probably confirm if people are pretty comfortable doing that at this show and at most shows.
Yeah, what we usually recommend is just what you said, Michelle, that people collect the payment method at the time that the order is written, but don't process it until it's time to ship. And I think it's a good compromise too, like you said, if people don't feel comfortable with that, then calling them and then doing processing their card or something at that time. But that way, when you ship something, you make sure you've been paid before you ship, and then they make sure that they pay only when they're about to get their product. So it seems kind of more fair for both parties that way.
This last slide here obviously is our contact information. The SUNY Canton SBDC has two locations, the one here at SUNY Canton and the other one in Plattsburgh at Clinton Community College. So depending on where you're located, if you need to contact us for follow-up, and of course, Lauren at Anka is always willing to answer questions and help out as well. Any of us are more than happy to help you out with any questions that you have, both in preparing for this show or other shows or any other general business questions that you have. The SBDC is really geared toward general business assistance. So, as your business gets started and grows, any of those issues, you can bring to us and we can try to assist you with those. So, if either of these locations are not convenient for you particularly, we have 23 centers in New York State, so you can contact one of us and we could give you the closest one, or you could log on to our website, which is nysbdc.org, and you'll be able to find there all of the locations in New York State and find the one that's closest to you. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. And like I said, if you have other questions, we're all more than happy to help out and we'd be happy to hear from you.